Good evening. Welcome to a regularly scheduled meeting of the Waterville City Council. If anybody would like an agenda, I believe they're on a stool just outside the door. Linda Cody, would you stand and lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And first up, we have the presentation of the auditor's report. Welcome.
I'll give a quick introduction. Eric Netto is with the firm that we've had for a few years during our audit. Well, actually, how many years? Now, 5th year. Okay, Nicholson and Associates.
Time flies.
So I think he's thoroughly familiar with our financials, and he's going to walk you through it. We gave him a copy of your presentation, so I'll have a paper copy of it.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me again. My name is Eric Netto. I'm a partner with Nicholson, Michaud & Company, and what you have in front of you tonight is a draft of the financial statements for fiscal year 19, and you also have a copy of a presentation, a slide book, and that's what we're going to focus on tonight. And it'll give you a good overview of the financial position of the city for the past fiscal year. So we're going to start on the slide called Independent Auditor's Report. This, our responsibility, the financial statements are the responsibility of management. Our responsibility as your auditor is to express an opinion on those statements based on our audit. Next slide, standards of conduct. We conduct our audit in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States. Those standards provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatement, and we are issuing an unmodified opinion on your fiscal year 19 financials. That's a clean opinion. Next slide, financial statement presentation. So your financial statements are basically there's two sets of financial statements within your financials. There's the government-wide financials. That is basically what we consider to be a full accrual set of financial statements. That's where we record capital assets, long-term debt, other liabilities related to your pension and other post-employment benefits, and various other accruals. We also report on fund financial statements. That would be your general fund, capital projects fund, special revenue funds, so on and so forth. And then what we do is we provide a reconciliation between the fund financial statements and the government-wide financial statements. Okay. On the next slide, taxes receivable. In fiscal year 19, at the end of fiscal year 19, your taxes receivable were about $1.289 million. That was an increase of approximately $188,000 over the prior year. But it is still below average, still below your 5-year average of about $1.3 million.
And Eric, for the taxes receivable, there is it 60 days after the end of the fiscal year?
Yeah, that's on a later slide. On the next slide, this property tax collection rate. This shows your collection rate over the past 5 years. Your collection rate for fiscal year 19 was about 94.6%. In fiscal year 18, it was about 95%. So a good collection rate on your property taxes. And within your footnotes, there is also additional information related to your tax levy. If you want to review your notes, you'll see more information there as well. Property tax rates. This next slide shows a historical analysis of your property tax rates. For the year that we're auditing, there was a 1.94 mil increase. So and then in fiscal year, so the fiscal year 19 rate was 25.27. And the year that we're going to be auditing moving forward, there was a 0.49 mil rate increase. So it'll be 25.76 mils. This next slide, unavailable revenue, that's what Mike was referring to. So a portion of your property tax receivable, so that bill is sent out, that revenue is recorded, but under GASB rules, any property taxes that remain uncollected after 60 days after year end, we record as unearned revenue. And we reflect that as a liability in your government-wide, in your fund financial statements. So that balance was about $659,000 at the end of fiscal year 19. That was an increase from $570,000 over the prior year. And a lot of times when you look at that unearned revenue number, it really coincides with what's happening on your property tax side. So earlier we mentioned that your property taxes were up over the prior year. That it seems reasonable to expect that your unearned revenue will be up as well.
I have a question. Is there a slide prepared that we can see this as well?
We don't have a slideshow.
That's wonderful, keep us engaged, thank you.
Please keep in order, sir.
Would you like to have a copy of it?
I'd like to see it for everybody.
I have one extra.
Oh, that's kind of you.
All you have to do is ask.
I just did.
All right, I'd like this meeting to come to order, please.
This next slide shows your long-term debt levels. At the end of fiscal year 19, your long-term debt was about $17 million. That outstanding balance is reported on your government-wide financial statements. Within your fund financial statements, your debt service payments, your principal and interest payments are shown as an expenditure. Your current year decrease in bonds and notes payable was about $2.24 million. That was an 11.6% reduction. This next slide shows your fund balance, general fund. Your general fund balance for the city and school combined at the end of fiscal year 19 was a little under $7.1 million. That was an increase of almost $1.4 million over fiscal year 18. This next slide shows your unassigned fund balance for the city. Your unassigned fund balance for the city was about $5.5 million at the end of fiscal year 19, and a portion of the city's general fund balance that was assigned to the fiscal year 20 budget period was $370,000. That's reported as a separate line item, separate from your unassigned fund balance in your financials. This next slide shows your fund balance, general fund for the school. The general fund balance for the school at the end of fiscal year 19 was about $1.06 million. That was an increase of $628,000 over the prior year. This next slide shows your fund balance policy calculation over the past 7 years. The city's policy is to maintain an unassigned fund balance of at least 12%. At the end of fiscal year 19, that calculation was 15.62%. That is calculated by taking your unassigned fund balance for both the city and the school and dividing it by your general fund expenditures. This next slide, fund balance utilization. So as you can see on this slide, the larger bar is your budget. That's what you budgeted to utilize for fund balance. And then the darker bar is what you actually utilize. So you'll notice for fiscal year 19 that you had budgeted to use about $260,000 of general fund balance, and we didn't utilize any of that fund balance. We actually added, as I mentioned earlier, we added to the city added to its general fund balance by about $1.4 million in fiscal year 19. These next two slides, I noticed I was reviewing this before I came tonight, that it says fiscal year 2018 up there, but these are actually fiscal year 2019 amounts. So this slide, general fund revenues, it's a little pie chart that shows a breakdown of your revenue by type. So you can see that taxes, intergovernmental revenue, tuition and charges for services, those represent about 93% of the total general fund revenue for fiscal year 19. And those categories all had positive budget to actual results in fiscal year 19. Within your audited financial statements, your budget to actual is reported on page 14. This next slide shows a little pie chart of your general fund expenditures. Again, education, public works, police, fire, and communications represent about 85% of your total general fund expenditures. And again, all of those expenditure categories also had positive budget to actual results during the fiscal year. Lastly, a few other matters. A few things we like to communicate with the council during our presentation is whether or not we had any difficulties in dealing with city or school management and performing our audit, and I'm happy to report that we did not. There were no disagreements that arose during the audit on any financial accounting, reporting, or auditing matters. We do discuss a variety of issues with management and staff throughout the audit, and those occurred within the normal course of our work. We didn't identify any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in internal control, so I'm happy to report that as well. And management and staff of the city and school, as long as we've been doing the audit, they've always been very receptive to our feedback and our requests and providing us with timely information. So I wanted to thank Aaron and his staff and Paul and her staff as well for that. So the financials are in draft form. We're just going through a few more quality control procedures in our office. We'll be ready to release within the next couple of weeks. And once we do release the financial statements, those are made available on the city's website. So those are available to be seen by the public as well.
Great. It's a great financials.
It was a good year.
We're getting there, you know.
All set?
Long story short, our debts are down and our reserve is growing back up a little bit after spending a ton of it for
I just
years.
want to mention while Eric
Yeah.
is still at the podium, page 14 of our audit, even though it's still in draft form, I think is a very important page because it shows what was budgeted and it shows what was spent. So it's budget versus actual, and also the revenues, what we estimated for revenues and what we actually received. So on the revenue side, Eric, if I'm reading this right, we collected $1.2 million more in revenues than what we anticipated.
That's correct.
Was there any one big category that contributed to that? Or not really, it's a number for 3 or 4 different large categories.
Well, one of the items in particular, one of the items in this fiscal year that did contribute to the overall growth in your general fund balance was the final receipt of your PERC reimbursement. And in fiscal year 18, you received, I believe it was around $910,000, and a lot of that was transferred to the capital projects fund to fund projects in that area. And I know in this fiscal year, you utilize your PERC reimbursement really to help control your mill rate increase. So that's one of the reasons why your general fund balance is growing this year. But otherwise, it was just the normal budget to actual variances that you're going to see in a particular year.
And then in the expenditures, as the city manager, I always look at where the overages are. So there are 3 lines that had overages in the expenditure side of things, and I think we're certainly very capable of explaining those 3 overages if any of you have questions. Mm-hmm. One is just the unclassified number towards the bottom of that table on page 14, where it shows that we're at 10,000 in the red. That 10,000 belonged in the admin category. Mm-hmm. But there are overages in Patty's department, city clerk, which I know that she can substantiate very well, and also in the comm center, Chief Massey's here. There you are. And we're ready to answer any questions about that, but all of the other departments, all the other categories really had very, very good spending accounts for themselves.
Yeah. In government financial statements, we're not required to report. It's only a single year presentation. A lot of financial statements, you'll see that it'll be comparative. Well, you have at least 2 years. I mean, if you were to take the budget to actual for the city and line it up over the past 5 to 10 years, I think you're going to find that the expenditures are, as far as budget to actual results, are generally pretty close. And I think that that is indicative of just the monitoring that takes place with department heads and city management, where sometimes, on the revenue side, it's a little less controllable, right? On the expenditure side, those are monitored very closely, and I think that's reflected in your financial statements.
And so when we get into the budget discussions in a month or so, we're going to all be talking about surplus. How much do we have in excess money? Surplus, in Eric's world, is the unassigned fund balance. So if you go to page 11, you'll see that fund balance, unassigned and assigned. So just for our benefit, Eric, the difference between the two, assigned and unassigned?
Well, assigned is is the portion of your general fund balance that you've voted to assign and utilize in your next budget period. And then what's left after you factor out, any particular fund balance that's restricted for a particular purpose, that's what's left. That's basically your unassigned, your retained earnings, so to speak. So again, at the end of fiscal year 19, general fund unassigned for the city was 5.5 million, and unassigned for the school was 900,000. And you're well above, the city's well above its 12% unassigned fund balance percentage, as you were in fiscal year 18 as well. I think the percentage was around 13.5% in the prior year.
And the year before that, we were right at 12.
Right at 12.
So as the mayor said, we've made very, very good progress.
Yeah. Yep.
We even dipped it below us at one point. We had a temporary time below.
Right.
At one point.
Yeah.
11.99.
Yeah.
Mr. Payne, did you have a question for the auditor?
Real quick question. You mentioned that our debt balance is down.
Yeah.
Does that include the $6 million bond, or will that reflect on next year's audit?
That's in next year's audit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you'd expect to see our debt balance higher next year?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right, but if you were to look at, and you've got the slides right there, comparatively, if you go back over the 5 or 6 year trend, it's not going to really push us up that much.
Yeah, that'll be a fiscal.
And in fact, hopefully we get on a more regular basis of bonding now that we have that, because now with this bond, we were able to hit that equilibrium where stuff was paying off, you take out what you need, and it doesn't really drive a huge tax increase for payments. Whereas in the past, we would wait forever and ever, and all of a sudden we need a ton of equipment, fix lots of roads, you take out a huge bond, and then you drive it up $500,000, and then you wait, and it keeps going down. So I think we're in a better place for that now.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a real goal moving forward, is to kind of even out the budget so you don't see those big fluctuations year to year.
Any other questions?
That's a good report.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for all the work. I mean, all right. And next on the agenda, disclosure of conflict of interest. Is there any counselor who feels they have a conflict of interest with a vote they'll take tonight? Seeing as none, we'll move on to the approval of the consent agenda. Could I get a motion for the approval of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Unfinished business, ordinance 25, 2020.
Move to read by title only.
Second.
All in favor?
An ordinance providing for amendment to marijuana ordinance.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Discussion.
Mike, it sounds like, I know Jennifer had some concerns about this, but at this point it sounds like she agrees with us on the law. Is that correct?
She does agree that we are able to license medical caregivers. Correct. We are required, and I don't think I stated this quite correctly in the article that Amy had today in the Sentinel. That was my fault. But when we do license medical growers, we are required to keep that information confidential in-house. I'm not sure I made that clear. That we will do.
Counselor Frankie.
Did we make a couple of adjustments after our meeting last week with the Maine Municipal Association?
Yeah, I'm going
Yes.
to let Patty handle that because she worked directly with Bill.
The information that was in the packet that was distributed in your agenda provides those additional amendments, which were actually highlighted in yellow. So basically, on page 2 of the ordinance, a person who cultivates marijuana for that person's own use or a caregiver not required to register under state law does not need a city license. We're striking out the tiers for medical marijuana and just keeping it adult use. We're adding a licensing section for caregivers registered under Maine law, that would be $500 annual license fee for that. And then we added a clause at the end of the ordinance regarding the confidentiality, and that those applications submitted for registered caregivers would be confidential except for internal duties of city staff.
So do we need a motion to amend?
Yes, you could amend by substitution, and that way all of the amendments listed in this would be included.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the amendment?
I have one question. So Jennifer's point was to keep confidentiality, and I know we just covered that. Does that survive a FOIA request?
Yes.
Okay.
Counselor Mayhew.
Yeah, having been a member of the Marijuana Ordinance Committee and looking this over with the amendments over the week, I definitely, with Maine Municipal Association, this has been approved through them, verified by our Waterville City Solicitor Bill Lee. You know, I think this is a very good, not only it creates a platform for the city to do appropriate regulation with code enforcement and proper licensing. I really believe this is really a concrete marijuana ordinance of the finest order, and I definitely would be voting to approve this.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Counselor.
Just after attending the session with the Maine Municipal last week, the whole system of having or the double system of having medical marijuana and adult use now is what makes it extremely confusing. I think we've done a pretty good job here of keeping the city on what's city business and not getting involved in anything beyond that.
Good. Right.
And that's why I think the way the adjustments we've made are excellent.
Good, and thank you for attending that. All right, seeing no further discussion, I will call for a roll call.
We
I
need
got to
to-
wait. We'll call on the amendment. We haven't
Correct.
voted on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment?
I'll move the ordinance as amended.
And now, could I get a roll call, please?
Yes. Counselor Morris?
Yes.
Counselor Oliveira?
Yes.
Counselor Smith?
Yes.
Counselor Mayhew?
Yes.
Counselor Foss?
Yes.
Counselor Frankie?
Yes.
Counselor Thomas?
Yes.
The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Next on unfinished business, ordinance 24, 2020.
Move to read by title only.
Second.
All in favor?
An ordinance providing for amendment to licenses and permits ordinance to add a reference to marijuana ordinance.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Discussion.
Was there anything that needed to be changed with this, Patty? No.
No, this actually just makes a reference to the other ordinance for the licensing fees and the procedure. So it just kind of clarifies that the city clerk administers those licenses as well.
All right, could I get a roll call, please?
Counselor Morris?
Yes.
Counselor Oliveira?
Yes.
Counselor Smith?
Yes.
Counselor Mayhew?
Yes.
Counselor Foss?
Yes.
Counselor Frankie?
Yes.
Counselor Thomas?
Yes.
The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed.
Moving on to new business, resolution 34, 2020.
A resolution providing for poverty abatement number 1, 2020. Be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Waterville, acting as municipal officers, that the 2016-2017 real estate taxes, including interest and fees, in the amount of $661.48 be evaded.
Move to adopt.
Seconded.
Discussion. Mike?
I wonder if a correction needs to be made. The resolution says 661.48, the memo says 662. Mrs. Cody, do you know what the correct number is?
The 661, because the 662 is supposed to be the end of the,
Oh, end of the period, so at less interest.
right, but the years, you need to make up 17 and 18.
Oh, it's 1718?
Can I get a motion for that amendment?
So moved.
All in favor of the amendment?
I'll move the resolution as amended.
Second.
And any further discussion? All in favor? Resolution 35, 2020.
Move to read by title only.
Second.
All in favor?
A resolution providing for appointing Thomas Dupre to the Planning Board.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Thanks, Tom. Next is Order 36, 2020.
Move to read by title only.
And second.
All in favor?
An order providing for approval of forfeiture.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Order 37, 2020.
Move to read by title only.
And second.
All in favor?
An order providing for approval of forfeiture.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Ordinance 38, 2020.
Move to read by title only.
And second.
All in favor?
An ordinance providing for amendment to zoning.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Discussion. I think I just want to highlight that this goes back to the conversation that Eric and I were having earlier this year, that we really need the planning board to be directed to have a more comprehensive zoning discussion, because once again, we're just kind of taking one lot and rezoning it different than everything that's around it. So it would be great if we could avoid this as much as possible, because it seems like we do it quite often.
So agreed.
So we'll take a vote. All in favor? Okay. And
If I may, request a waiver of cloture to bring up this item.
So moved. I waive cloture to add resolution 39-2020 to the agenda.
Second.
all in favor?
A resolution providing for establishing hours for voter registration, whereas Title 21A, MRSA, Section 122.6 and 122.8 requires special evening hours for voter registration for 2 hours in the evening between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. on at least one of the 5 business days before an election, unless the municipal officers establish different hours. And be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Waterville, acting as municipal officers as follows, that the City Council hereby establish voter registration hours to be Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with no special evening hours.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Discussion? Counselor.
Is this something that we regularly do? If it's state law?
It's state law, yes, and we are required to have evening hours unless you authorize a change to that. For slower elections, this presidential primary isn't particularly busy. We haven't had a lot of absentee ballot requests, so it's really not necessary to have staff at City Hall after 5 o'clock. We would be there doing other work, of course, but it wouldn't be busy with voters or absentees. Of course, probably for June, we may waive the hours as well, but in November, of course, we'll have at least one evening and maybe 2 before the presidential election.
Thank you.
right, all in favor? Community notes is a time where if anybody has something they would like to say or speak about or let us know about that was not on the agenda this evening, now would be the time to do so. We just ask you come to the podium, state your name, tell us where you live and what you have to say.
My name is Scott Mack. I live in Ward 7. I just want to invite everybody to every Thursday. They actually started it last Thursday, but every Thursday from 1 to 3 p.m. over at the Second Baptist Church on 172 Water Street, they are having a community clothing closet. They're also accepting donations, but from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., anybody can come over, pick out clothing. It's all free. It's all by donations. They're also accepting donations, so if anybody has any clothing they'd like to donate, come on by. They have everything from men's clothing to women's clothing to children's clothing. They even have infants' clothing. So they have quite a bit, so I encourage you coming over and check it out. And like I said, if you have anything that's kicking around your closet, especially during spring cleaning, bring it on by. They'd love to have it.
Great, thank you.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Leonard, and I live in Waterville, and I'm here tonight to represent the Poor People's Campaign, which is a national movement with branches in 42 states of the Union, including right here in Maine. This is a nonviolent fusion movement of poor people and our allies building power to hold our politicians to account to overcome the interlocking systems of oppression that keep 43% of Americans, including over 500,000 here in Maine, in poverty or one crisis away from it. We're working all over the state of Maine and around the country to build this movement, which continues the work of Martin Luther King shortly before he died. I have information here if you're interested in learning about the movement or getting involved with us. We also have 4 events actually scheduled. 3 of them in the area are listed on this sheet of paper. We have outreach meetings every month, and we have one this Sunday at the Pleasant Street Methodist Church. Next Sunday, that's the 9th. On the 16th, we're showing a film at the Congregational Church in the morning after service about the history of the movement and its current reconfiguration. And then we have another outreach meeting on March 8th, and we're going to show the film again at the Lithgow Library in Augusta. So if anybody's interested in learning about the Poor People's Campaign, please ask me for a sheet of paper or come talk to me. And there's email addresses and Facebook addresses and all kinds of information.
Hello, Cindy Jacobs. I'm Ward 4, but I'm representing the Waterville Public Library. I have some really awesome news for you guys. One of our senior people at the library applied for and received a stipend to go to a conference in Chicago at the annual American Libraries Association meeting, where she will be concentrating on rural and small community library, facilitating programs in. She'll be doing this in June. She actually has a tremendous amount of coursework to do before she gets there. She'll be doing it all this semester. This is a tremendous opportunity. It was a very competitive pool of people that applied. I have to believe myself that one of the reasons she was chosen is because she is representing a national award-winning rural library here in Waterville that we won in 2017. And this is just a tremendous asset for us here in Waterville. It's programming, it's working with our community people, and that's what we do. The second great thing I have to report for you from the library is that our program numbers for 2019 are way up. That means people are coming to the libraries for programs that we're doing, and they're loving them. I mean, we've been looking at a lot of the reviews of programs, and we're just really happy that we're sort of finding our way for new programming, and people are coming to some of our older programming, and we're always open to any ideas that any of you have for programs that you would like to see. We're finding that more and more people, because people get books online and things like that, the way to get people to your library is through programmings. We have a really neat, it's an adult craft program that we all kind of thought, well, how's that going to work? And it's really popular, and it's getting a bunch of older people out of their homes and meeting other people and enjoying themselves. So that's just the plus from the library. Thank you.
Okay. Mike, you're up.
Don't we put that out, Mike? Want me to put that out?
Yeah. Well, as the agenda says, there's one item, and that's the Spirit of America Award. So at your next meeting, we'd like to nominate someone for that award. It's something the city does every year. Been doing it for 6 or 7 years, Patty, probably, at least. So if there are any nominations for someone that you think has provided exceptional volunteer service, let us know. Patty and I have a name that we would like to submit. And if there are any others that the council or others in the audience want to submit, let Patty or myself know. Spirit of America Volunteer of the Year. Streetlights, getting there, probably 75% done. Transfer of all of our streetlights to LED. And you'll see the savings in the budget. And I went over the budget with Mark Turner this morning. It was $150,000 savings next year.
Fantastic.
Probably more the following year. So that's a huge, huge benefit. We talked about having a strategic planning meeting for the council at some point, and April 4th seems to be the only date that the facilitator can do it. It's a Saturday, April 4th. April 4th.
We did one last year.
Looked good?
Yeah, that was, yeah.
All right, all right. Right? If you can all let me know, doesn't necessarily have to be this moment, but in the next day, let me know so we can schedule. Craig, the fellow that did it for us the last time, did an excellent job. We get together on a Saturday, 4 hours, talk about how the whole business of running the city works, especially from the elected officials' point of view. Timely with the budget coming up. Always a long process, so I think that day would give us a good jump on how to work together. I think everyone that went through it the last time found it helpful.
I thought it was very helpful during last year's budget session. To be honest, I thought it.
Good.
Yeah.
So, at Councilor Morris's urging, we've been talking more about a search committee regarding the next person coming in as city manager. So starting that process now, not waiting. And so the idea is to have a small working group that would report back to you on a timetable and other recommendations. And so I know that Councilor Morris wants to be involved. The mayor wants to be involved. It would be good to have one other city councilor, I think, involved. Very good. Councilor Frankie? All right. So what we'd like to do is then report back to you probably at the February 18th meeting regarding a plan on moving forward. Did I miss anything?
No, that's fine. If we're going to accept, we can form the committee now, and yeah, we'll schedule a meeting, and
Okay.
we'll come back with a plan on the February 18th meeting. I think we can do that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right. Last item, my list is what you see in back of you. I've got a map here, but hopefully all of you can see it from where you're at, so maybe I won't put this up. I'm going to ask Chief Massey to help me because, as you know, we've been doing parking enforcement in the concourse, and so what we decided to do at the beginning of January was to do a survey with the fellow that's out there marking the vehicles. Every day, he's been counting spaces available. So we have 4 sections that we did that survey on. C, D, E, and C is divided between south and north. D is south and north. Sorry about the shaky red dot. Not that easy to hold this thing together. So, Joe, I'm going to let you take it from there.
So the parking enforcement officer works Monday through Saturday, and he flexes his schedule. Throughout the month of January, some days he may go out in the mornings, and then sometimes it may be midday, like from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and then late afternoon. so that the survey catches almost all of the day. So each day he would go out in those particular sections and mark the available spaces, and as you can see at the end of January, for section C that has 46 spaces total, the average available spaces was 11 or 24% of that section had available spacing.
And that's this one right here.
Yes. For section D North, that has 28 spaces in it. And there were 1 to 2 available spaces, or about 3%, so not many spaces available in that section. On section D South, that has 57 spaces, average there were 16 spaces available, or 3% of that section. And then for section E, 52 spaces, an average of 31 available spaces, or 63% of the spaces there.
I'm sorry, go.
We should mention, well, it says it up on top, that the red is all day.
Oh, yes.
And the blue is 2 hours.
Yes.
That's the key thing to remember. So what this makes very clear to us is that there's very, very little all-day parking. There's your all-day here. And so when you look at D North and D South, 3%, 3%. And so when you look at E, which is 2 hour, there's 63% available spaces. So what we've decided to do is to convert E, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but we decided to convert E into more all-day parking. We met with people from inland because they complained about not enough all day. And so this will provide more all-day parking for the employees in this area, and probably in this area too, of course, along that side of the complex.
And just to be clear, Mike, the parking spaces closest to the road in section E, those will remain
These
2
right
hours parking,
here will remain 2 hour.
but the rest of that section will be all-day parking.
Right.
And that's effective immediately.
Matter of fact, it started today.
Yes, it did. Went down there, the parking enforcement officer and the foreman for Public Works, and he'll be taking the 2-hour signs off from the, it should be the east side of that, excuse me, the west side of that, section E, to get rid of those 2-hour signs. It'll take 5 to 6 weeks when he orders the all-day parking for us to get those and put those up there. Right now, there is an adequate number of 2-hour parking signs on the west side, on the east side of that section. There was one sign for about every 3 parking spaces.
In here, you mean?
Yes.
Mike, not that it matters, but just because it's bothering the engineer and me, the 16 out of 57 spaces is actually 20-something%. So just if we can update that when we show this to somebody in the future.
Which one?
So section D South, it says it's 57 spaces, there's an average of 16 available, that's actually like 25%.
Yeah, that's more than 3.
It was carried over from the one before.
Sorry?
Just so if it can get fixed when we show it to people.
No, thank you.
Okay.
That's the engineering. You suppose the 3% is right or the 16 is right? I think the 3% is right. Okay, we'll fix that.
Yeah.
We'll fix that. So what we're going to continue to do is this kind of survey. So the next area, what we'll do is this area here, F and G. Joe's parking enforcement officer will count available spaces here too. Because there's been talk about making more all-day parking in this area. So we're just trying to achieve the right balance. And the last thing I want to say is the redesign the council approved a few weeks ago provides for 76 new spaces. All those new spaces will be in here, and 42 of them will be right in section E. Because this plaza will go away, a lot of gain in through here. So actually 42 new come up here,
Because we don't know when the design, the actual construction will happen, but we have the design approved by the council, so this whole area will see the changes. These sections will remain the same. I know that Council Frank had a question.
I know that the chief is doing a lot of things besides worrying about parking, but isn't this information that should have been sent to the parking committee before they made their final recommendation?
We didn't start this until January, so the committee hadn't met since then. But it's certainly something we'll share going forward. And suddenly we realized we don't really know how many spaces are and how many are open. We're going to find that out.
So we've addressed a lot of that side of the concourse. But the ones that are suffering are in lots B and A that we've heard at council several times. And we have looked at that because those numbers are not on there as part of available free spaces. And we also made a change to all day versus 2 hours there, by the sounds of it, fairly quickly.
In E.
In E.
Yep.
What are we doing with A and B? I mean, that's part of, like Councilor Frankie talked about, the parking committee being involved and making their recommendations and stuff like that. Mayor, maybe you can add on to that. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. But you know, B and A they're here quite a bit talking about the lack of space, being able to keep their clients there for 3 hours, but we just made pretty easy changes to E.
Right. But the problems that B has seen has been the fact that 2 hour restriction in B is being enforced. If you converted some of the spaces here all day.
Well, no, what if you just made it 3 hours?
I'm sorry?
Just make it 3 hours.
We discussed that. I think the chief can speak to this. The thing is, the guy makes his rounds, and it'll make his shift longer because now he'll have to wait. He'll mark the tires, and then he has to wait 3 hours to see. And you can't have, it's also going to be very difficult if you have 2 hour parking one place and 3 hour parking another place. I mean, another part of what we're doing, because we discussed a lot of these things the other day in a meeting with myself and Councilor Morris and Mike and the chief. I also suggested that we make more of we keep a path cleared so that you can get from E across to B, so that if you're using that as all-day parking, it's easier for you to get over to that section, because it's not a problem right now, but when there is snow, you get a snowbank over there, and so it's hard to traverse that. I think we discussed all of those things. We discussed putting more all-day parking in B. Our concern basically was that if you, obviously that's closer to this building, if you make that all-day parking, chances are those people are going to park in those spaces, and we don't need to get into a discussion about whether they should be or not.
I do think that, I mean, this is, if you look at some other college communities, I think if you were to look at Lewiston, for example, and Brunswick, they don't let those college kids just park in municipal parking now all over the place. They say no. I think if you take a look, you'll find that there are much more restrictive rules in other college communities than we have right now. And since we were told that students weren't going to be parking there, now they are, and it's been over a year and nothing's really been done, I think that the city needs to make the move and not wait for Kobe at this point. So that's I'm going to put that out there, that the next move needs to be for the city to address that issue.
And sorry, but that's where I brought up, that's why I'm bringing up B&A. We studied everything but the people that are having the hardest time with parking. I would like to see the study with B&A and also gone to 3 hour, as we've suggested. You know, if parking committee can't get it done.
Well, I think Chief did do one for
Yes.
B a while back, and it's not a lack of available spaces typically. It's
Not a lack of available spaces, it's the amount of time that you
Yes.
can park.
So we do actually know that it's actually just the time.
Okay.
That is the 2 hour time limit for those clients.
Does that need council intervention to get the 3 hour thing done?
I don't know, we just made all day parking.
Why wouldn't you just make part of it all day? Keep it all day. Why not make the whole concourse 3 hours?
Well, if you make it 3 hours, it's a couple of issues. Our part-time parking enforcement officer works 4 hours a day. And it's 2-hour parking right now, so he can go and make his rounds and come back in a couple hours. So if we go to 3-hour parking, instead of having a 4-hour, working 4 hours per day, he'll work 6. And he's funded for 20 hours a week. So be an increase in parking if in fact he's a part-time, if he'd want to do that 6 hours. So again, that's problematic. And then having 2 different parking time limits, I think would simply be confusing for some people.
Mike, I think we have to make a decision because I've had correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but we pretty much unofficially disbanded the parking committee.
That's what everybody keets saying.
So what I'm saying is, we
One new member right here.
yeah, we have to make it. Now I've been to all the meetings, and Mike, you could correct me if I'm wrong, to the parking committee meetings, and like I said, there has been some attendance issues, and there has been disruption and lack of efficiency in coming to an agreement. So we need to make an official decision, I think first and foremost, about reorganizing and establishing a new parking committee. And the other,
Just do it.
just,
How about we just have a list of names by the next meeting?
so I think,
Can you put it on the agenda for the next meeting?
like I said, I'm still interested in staying on it. It's, but I think it needs new blood, obviously, and it needs a new course of direction by, obviously, the council wants that, and I think we need to forward that sooner rather than later.
Well, and I'll just say, we had a long discussion about Section B in our meeting, and I had some ideas about what to do there. I'm not sure this right now is the particular forum to go deep into that discussion. But I agree. I think what we essentially came to after our meeting was that we wanted to start with making these spaces in E all day because that's an easy change to make. And it doesn't change anything about the way we enforce parking, and maybe see what sort of effect that has on the broader picture. And then I think there are some creative things we could do in Section B. I don't want to get too deep into it now, but I agree that it's probably, it is time to start over with the parking committee with some fresh ideas and some fresh faces, along with probably some holdovers from the previous committee.
It'll be on the next agenda.
Just if you have a committee or a subcommittee that doesn't get done what it's supposed to do, where you end up with a parking committee meeting at a city council meeting. So I'm happy to be on the parking committee since it is my parking lot.
I figured you would probably be, because actually Councilor Tate was one of the original members.
Yes. So he's in that ward?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, we'll put that on the agenda. But we at least wanted to let you know, we're looking at things there, we're trying to do our best. We saw this as an immediate thing that could help. Certainly with the people looking for all-day parking, and that's a lot of them that are up in the inland. At least that's what we heard from. There probably are others too. But this will create more space.
Do you have questions from the crowd?
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Linda Warner from the Yard Goods Center. I'm really slumped. I have been here to this meeting multiple times asking about parking in Section B specifically. And elderly people who carry a bag like this, it's not just fully armed, probably weighs about 10 pounds. This is mine. And they can't carry the bag from Section B to Section D. And I cannot believe we haven't even begun to think about looking at Section B. And you, sir, I don't know your name, but you've never been into our store.
That's not true. I had a long discussion with Ken's sister. Yes. And actually, I was the one who initiated giving you the special permits that you had for a long time. So I know that we haven't talked, but I have been involved in this issue, and I forced it onto the agenda.
I did send you this map a week ago in response to your email, and I never heard back from you. I was expecting to hear something.
Well, I saw a map with pictures of spaces behind our buildings that were supposed to be for parking spaces. This map is new to me. You did say, I found one in the mail. I don't think you ever sent me a map.
No, I emailed you this very map.
We'll have to agree to disagree.
Okay.
But regardless, section B is where we have the problem, and it's been a problem only since the Colby dormitory has arisen, that we can't have, my students are getting tickets, our customers are getting tickets.
I don't see how the Colby students is the problem. The problem is it's 2 hours and you need 3.
But for 50 years,
Well, I can answer some of that. Some of that is, if there's open spaces, we never enforced. But there was always a discussion, since I've been around, about why are we not enforcing our parking? Why have 2-hour parking if we're not enforcing it? So I think they're two separate discussions. One is about available spaces, the other is about enforcement and the needs of the business.
and I know when my 2 students got tickets, there were plenty of parking spaces. The issue was that one moved a car from one section to another section, which now is not allowed, in the same parking area. So she moved it from one space in D to another space in D and got a ticket.
Prohibited been in there for a long time.
It's not just limited to the spot, it's the entire section. Well, that's your problem right there.
You can't move from one 2-hour spot to another 2-hour spot, just to avoid that.
Hang on, so I park in B, right? If I move over to C, is it far enough away that I can get away with it? Or no matter where I park, I might limit downtown to 2 hours.
At that point, you might as well park in the all-day parking.
But I'm trying to just wrap my head around it legitimately. How far away do you have to go before it doesn't count?
We use the sections that you're in.
Now, Mike told me it was, my customers had to move from B to a long-term parking space, which are full of Colby students. I have gone and walked the driveway all by myself.
I don't know why we don't just make long-term parking spaces there. It seems very simple. Straightforward.
Like I said, I didn't really want to get into this, but what I suggested is that, because the problem is if you make it all-day parking, the Colby kids are going to park there. Let's be honest.
That's a separate thing that we can deal with.
I understand.
We can prohibit that.
But so the suggestion that I made is that back row, you could make it, you can park there for as long as you want between 6 a.m. and 12 a.m., for example, and then you could just say no overnight parking in that section, which I think would be an interest, because then the Colby kids are not going to park there by default. Now, I think that's really a discussion for the parking committee, and I understand that you're not familiar with me and we haven't talked, but we have made a lot of special accommodations for the Yard Goods Center, and the idea was that the parking committee was supposed to come up with a more long-term solution. Unfortunately, they haven't done their job, which I apologize that they haven't done their job. But we are going to reform the parking committee and hopefully come up with some recommendations that actually solve this problem rather than just kicking the can down the road.
You're right. If you towed everyone overnight there, you'd have no Colby students. Yes, Ms. Leonard, yeah, of course.
Can I recommend that while the parking committee is reforming and deciding, breaking up and getting back together, that some special permits be reissued to the Yard Goods Center for their students so that they don't have to get tickets. Well, the council and the parking committee are figuring it out, and just give them 3-hour things that they can split their dashboards.
Well, so what we decided the last time we discussed this, to refresh people's memory, was that we would give special permits to anybody who qualified for handicap parking. And that turned out to be 2 of the 30-something students that go to the knitting classes. I understand that just because you doesn't mean you don't have issues traveling that far. Of course, there always comes a question of where do you draw the line when you're, I mean, it seems obvious to draw the line where the state has drawn the line when it comes to handicap parking. But I mean, certainly we could put it on the agenda for the next meeting about whether we want to extend those permits until we come to a more permanent solution. We've done it twice before. I wouldn't have a problem with that.
And what about with the Yard Goods Center, who knows permits for students determine who gets the permits.
Well, this is another suggestion I made, that I think there should be a process by which you could apply for some sort of special permit based on whether you have classes or, because, and there may be other businesses that are doing this sort of thing that we're not making any accommodation for. And it becomes a bit of a slippery slope, because then how many people are we going to make special accommodations for?
We're making special accommodations for parking.
I don't want this. I actually am not going to sit here all night as a park, because it's not the parking committee, and we're kind of done talking about parking until we have a parking committee. That's where I'm at with this. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.